Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. The call came in at 11:47 at night, and the voice on the other end belonged to a state trooper named Vic, who had been working highway patrol for over a decade and who did not, as a rule, sound uncertain about things. He sounded uncertain about this. "We've got a closure on the 41 stretch out past the Heller County line," he said. "Westbound lanes. Something crossed the road." I was the on-call incident coordinator for the district, which meant closures, accidents, hazmat situations, anything that required someone with the authority to manage a scene and the paperwork to back it up. I'd handled a lot of calls over 7 years in the role. Deer strikes, cargo spills, a semi that had jackknifed so badly it had taken a guardrail and 40 feet of concrete median with it. I knew how to read a scene and move through it efficiently and get the road back open with minimal fuss. "What crossed it?" I asked. Vic was quiet for a beat longer than I expected. "That's the part I'd rather show you than explain," he said. The 41 stretch past the Heller County line was 22 miles of interstate that ran through a flat corridor of old-growth forest and marsh, the kind of road that always felt like it was on loan from the landscape around it, rather than imposed on it. No lights, no shoulders to speak of, the tree lines coming in close on both sides. I'd driven it hundreds of times and always had the vague sense that the forest was simply tolerating the road the way something large and settled tolerates a minor inconvenience. I got there just after 1 a.m. There were 2 patrol cars angled across the westbound lanes with their lights running and a third on the shoulder, and Vic was standing at the edge of the light with his arms crossed looking at the road surface. He was a rangy, no-nonsense man, and the expression on his face when he turned to meet me was the one I hadn't seen on him before. Not fear, more like the careful composure of someone who has decided how they're going to behave regardless of how they feel. He pointed at the road without saying anything. The damage ran across both westbound lanes and the shoulder in a track about 12 feet wide. The asphalt had cracked and depressed in a pattern that suggested an enormous downward force moving in a walking rhythm. Impacts spaced roughly 15 feet apart, each one deep enough that the road base beneath the asphalt had fractured and given way. The shoulder barrier on the far side had been hit and folded outward, not broken, folded. The steel bent smooth and continuous, the way you'd bend a piece of cardboard, rather than the way metal fails under impact. I crouched next to one of the impacts and looked at it and thought about what I knew about weight and force and road surface tolerances and came up quickly against the edges of what made sense. "How wide do you figure each of those is?" I asked. "About 4 feet across," Vic said. "Roughly oval." I stood up. "You call wildlife?" "There's already someone here," he said. "She was on the scene before we were, actually. Been out here about 2 hours." He nodded toward the far shoulder, where a woman in a field jacket was crouched at the tree line with a flashlight, looking at something in the grass. Sarah Oren was a wildlife biologist with the State Land Management Office, and she had the focused, slightly distracted quality of someone in the middle of thinking through a problem that is proving more interesting than expected. She was in her late 30s, practical in her movements, and when I introduced myself, she gave me a brief handshake and turned back to what she'd been examining without any particular ceremony. "These came from the trees on the east side," she said, gesturing at a trail of damage in the grass that I hadn't seen from the road. The turf had been torn up in a path leading from the eastern tree line to the road, the ground compressed and gouged in the same rhythmic pattern as the asphalt. Whatever made these was moving fast when it hit the road, not running, but not calm either. The stride pattern is uneven. The right side impacts are deeper than the left, consistently. "Injured," I said. "Significantly," she said. "And something else." She moved her flashlight to a section of torn turf near the tree line edge, and I saw the staining, dark and substantial, soaked down into the soil. A lot of it. It was bleeding badly before it even reached the road. I looked back at the folded guardrail. What size of animal are we talking about? Sarah was quiet for a moment, in a way that felt considered rather than evasive. "Nothing I have a classification for," she said evenly. "The track dimensions and the force implied by the road damage aren't consistent with anything in my reference range. I've been working wildlife for 16 years. She stood up and looked at the eastern tree line. "I don't have a candidate for this." I stood there with that for a moment. "Where did it go after it crossed?" She pointed west, where the track continued through the opposite shoulder and into the western tree line. "In there," she said, moving slower after it crossed. The stride shortened and the depth decreased. It was weakening. I looked at the western tree line, dark and close, and then at the eastern one, and something made me look at the eastern trees for longer than I'd intended. Not anything I could name, just a quality to the darkness there that felt different from the western side. Heavier, maybe. More occupied. "How long ago did this happen?" I asked. "Track edges are clean," Sarah said. "Ground moisture suggests within the last 3 hours." We set up cones and ran the detour routing, and I got on the phone with the district office to log the closure and start the chain of calls that a situation like this required. I kept the description vague. Significant road damage, possible large animal strike, assessment ongoing. The kind of language that communicated seriousness without inviting questions I didn't have answers to yet. Around 2:30, Sarah came and found me at my truck, where I was finishing up the call log. "The eastern tree line," she said, without preamble. "What about it?" "I've been watching it for the last 40 minutes. She had her flashlight off and was looking at the trees with the careful patience of someone who's learned to observe without announcing it. "There's something in there." I looked. The trees were dark and dense, and at first I saw nothing but the flat wall of them in the ambient glow of the patrol lights. Then I looked at the middle distance, rather than the near edge, and I saw what she meant. The trees, at a certain depth, were not moving the way the others were moving. There was a light wind running through the tops of everything on both sides of the road, the branches shifting in a slow and continuous way. But in one section of the eastern tree line, roughly centered on where the track had come out, the upper branches were still, not calm, still in the way that things are still when something large beneath them is displacing the air differently, blocking the wind at ground level and creating a pocket of false quiet above. It was big. Whatever was standing in those trees was big enough to interrupt the weather immediately around it. "Has it moved?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Twice," she said. "Both times to the left. It's not coming towards the road. It's tracking west." She paused, following the same line as the thing that crossed. I thought about that, about the badly injured thing that had crossed the road, bleeding and uneven, moving fast in the way that frightened things move fast, and then about whatever was in those trees, moving slowly and without urgency and without any apparent concern about the lights or the people or the patrol cars sitting 30 feet from it. "It doesn't care about us," I said. "No," Sarah said, "but it knows we're here. That's a different thing." I went to Vic and told him I wanted the crew pulled back from the eastern shoulder and stationed on the western side of the road. He looked at me for a moment, and I could see him deciding how much he wanted to know about the reason before agreeing. He decided he didn't want to know and started moving people. Sarah stayed near the road's center line with me, and we watched the eastern tree line together. Over the next 20 minutes, the pocket of stillness moved steadily leftward through the trees, parallel to the road, keeping pace with something we couldn't see. Once, at a distance I estimated at about 60 feet into the tree line, I saw the canopy shift in a single smooth depression, the tops of several trees bending briefly downward and then releasing, like something had passed beneath them at a height that had no business existing. I heard it once, not a sound exactly, more of a pressure change, a deep and momentary drop in the air that I felt in my ears and my chest simultaneously, the kind of physical sensation that your body registers as sound before your brain catches up with it. Next to me, Sarah exhaled slowly through her nose. Neither of us said anything. Then the stillness in the eastern canopy moved past us and continued westward, and the wind came back through the trees normally, and the darkness in there was just ordinary darkness again. We stood there for a while, making sure. I went down the western shoulder about a quarter mile with a flashlight, while the others waited at the vehicles, following the original track through the grass where it continued past the guardrail and into the western tree line. I didn't go into the trees. I just stood at the edge and listened and looked at what the flashlight showed me. The track in the western grass was wetter than the eastern side, a lot wetter. The ground between the impacts was dark and soaked, and in the beam of the flashlight, the grass itself was matted down and stained for a wide swath on either side of the track. Whatever had crossed the road had made it this far and then moved into the trees, still bleeding, still moving, and the trail of it going into the dark was considerable enough that I stood there for a moment thinking about scale and what that much loss meant for anything, and felt something that wasn't fear exactly, but was close to it in the way that standing at the edge of something very deep feels adjacent to falling. I went back to the vehicles. Sarah was making notes in a field book, writing steadily in the quick, compressed way of someone capturing things before they slip. I sat on the hood of my truck and looked at the road and the folded guardrail and the cracked asphalt and the whole strange geometry of the scene laid out under the patrol lights. "The thing in the trees," I said. "The second one. Do you think it got what it was following?" Sarah kept writing for a moment. "I think it wasn't in a hurry," she said. "And I think the first one was, so probably yes, eventually." She closed the field book. The thing I keep thinking about is why the first one crossed the road at all. They don't do that. Things that size, whatever size that is, they avoid open ground. The road is exposure. She looked at the eastern tree line, ordinary and dark now. It crossed because the alternative was worse. We got the road reopened at 7:20 the following morning. The repair crew documented the asphalt damage as the result of an undetermined large vehicle strike, possibly an overloaded transport that had not stopped. The bent guardrail was logged as a separate maintenance issue. I signed off on both reports and drove home in the early morning and sat in my kitchen for a while before I could think about sleeping. My incident report for that night runs to 4 pages and contains almost nothing that is true in the way that the things I actually saw are true. It contains the language that the situation required, the language that fits into the existing frameworks and doesn't create problems for anyone. I've written reports like that before. Everyone in this line of work has. The ones where the true version and the official version are different documents and you keep one and file the other. Sarah sent me a brief message about a week later. It said that she'd submitted her field notes internally and received no response, which in her experience meant either that someone had already filed something over it or that someone had decided not to. She said she was fine either way. She said she'd been in this work long enough to understand that some things don't fit the available boxes and that the available boxes don't change to accommodate them. I appreciated the honesty of that and didn't have much to add to it. That stretch of the 41 is open and running normally. The repaired section looks like any other repaired section, just a slightly different shade of asphalt, where the new surface met the old. Nobody driving over it would know anything had happened there. I take a different route to work now, one that runs north and adds about 12 minutes to my commute, keeping me well clear of that corridor. I told myself for the first few weeks that this was temporary, that I'd go back to the regular route once enough time had passed and the memory of it had softened into something more manageable. I don't tell myself that anymore. The reason I changed routes permanently is this. Twice in the past month, I've been driving after dark on roads near that general area. Not that stretch specifically, but within a few miles of it. And twice, I've caught something at the tree line in my headlights. Not in the road, not coming toward me, just present at the tree line edge, at a height that doesn't have a ready explanation, still and dark and large in the peripheral wash of the headlights. Both times it stopped moving when I slowed down. Both times I didn't slow down for long. I don't know if it's the same thing I saw that night or something else entirely. I don't know if the distinction matters. What I know is that both times I caught it, it was on the eastern side of the road, moving west, unhurried, patient as anything, like it's still following something and the distance between them is closing.